The observation station floated silently in the darkness beyond Neptune's orbit. Inside the sleek metal structure, Commander Vexthar studied another screen filled with human combat footage. His silver skin reflected the blue glow of the monitors as his large black eyes tracked every movement of the soldiers below. The Kashari Collective had been watching Earth for 37 standard cycles. That was roughly 37 Earth years, though the Kashari measured time differently. Vexthar had spent almost his entire adult life studying these strange creatures called humans. He knew their tactics better than he knew his own species' historical battles. On the screen, human soldiers moved through a training exercise. They communicated with hand signals and worked together like a single organism. Vexthar had watched thousands of hours of similar footage. He had seen humans in real combat too, though the Kashari never interfered. They simply watched and learned. The Kashari were not warriors by nature. Their species had evolved on a peaceful world with few predators. When they reached the stars and met other races, they realized they needed to understand conflict. War existed in the galaxy whether they liked it or not, so the Kashari became students of warfare. Even though they rarely fought themselves, humans fascinated them. These beings were physically weak compared to most spacefaring species. A Kashari stood 7 feet tall with natural armor plating beneath their skin. A Draxian could lift 1,000 pounds without effort. A Zenth could survive in the vacuum of space for several minutes. But humans? They were fragile. Their skin tore easily. Their bones broke under pressure. They needed oxygen constantly and died without water in just days. Yet somehow these weak creatures had become some of the most effective fighters the Kashari had ever observed. Vexthar had theories about why. He had written 3 academic papers on the subject. The first paper discussed human emotional bonds. Humans formed deep connections with their fellow soldiers. They called it love, friendship, brotherhood. These bonds made them fight harder. A human would risk death to save a friend. This was unusual in the galaxy. Most species fought for logical reasons like resources or territory. The second paper analyzed human creativity. When humans faced a problem, they found solutions that other species never considered. They used their environment as a weapon. They invented new tactics on the fly. They adapted to any situation. This flexibility made them dangerous opponents. The third paper examined human stubbornness. That was the word they used, stubbornness. Humans refused to quit even when logic said they should surrender. They kept fighting when wounded. They continued missions when exhausted. They did not give up. Ever. Scholar Quinara entered the observation room carrying a data tablet. She was Vexthar's research partner, shorter than him but with brighter silver skin that indicated her younger age. Her eyes were even larger than his, a sign of her family's genetics. "The council has made their decision," she said, her voice musical in the way all Kashari voices sounded. "We are authorized for first contact." Vexthar felt his heart rate increase. After 37 cycles of watching, they would finally meet humans in person. "When?" 3 months of preparation, then we begin the approach," Quinara replied. She sat down next to him and watched the training footage. "Do you think we understand them well enough?" Vexthar gestured at the walls covered with screens and data displays. "We have documented every major human conflict for the past 4 decades. We have analyzed their military academies, their training programs, their weapons development. We have psychological profiles of hundreds of their commanders and soldiers. Yes, I believe we understand them." Quinara tilted her head, a Kashari expression of uncertainty. "We have studied how they fight. But do we understand why they fight? Do we understand what makes them human?" "Philosophy," Vexthar said with a clicking sound that indicated mild amusement. "You always ask the difficult questions. We understand enough to make contact safely. That is what matters." The council had spent years debating this moment. First contact was always risky. If humans perceived the Kashari as a threat, their military might could be turned against the observers. But if contact went well, humanity could become a valuable ally. The galactic community needed members who understood conflict, even if the Kashari preferred peace. The plan was careful and thorough. 3 Kashari ships would appear over major human cities simultaneously. They would broadcast messages of peace in all human languages. Human leaders had been chosen to receive advance warning through anonymous channels, reducing the panic factor. Everything was designed to show the Kashari meant no harm. After initial contact, a cultural exchange would begin. 12 Kashari observers would live among humans for 3 months. They would be divided into pairs and sent to different locations. The goal was to experience human daily life, not just human warfare. The final report would determine if humanity was ready to join the galactic community. Vexthar had volunteered immediately. He had spent his career studying humans from a distance. Now he would walk among them, speak with them, learn from them directly. Quinara had volunteered to be his partner. Together they had authored 5 papers on human behavior. Together they would take the next step. The commander looked at his reflection in a dark screen. His tall, slender body looked nothing like a human. His silver skin, large eyes, and graceful movements were alien in every way. Would humans accept him? Would they fear him? He had watched humans interact with many strange things. They kept animals as companions. They created machines that thought and spoke. They even made friends with their former enemies, something rare in the galaxy. Surely they could accept the Kashari. "We should review the contact protocols again," Quinara suggested. "We cannot afford mistakes." They spent the next hours going through every detail. How to greet humans without seeming threatening. How to eat human food without becoming ill. How to sleep in Earth's gravity. How to communicate clearly in English, the language they had both learned. Vexthar had practiced English for years. He could speak it well, though his voice made the sound slightly different than a human would. Quinara was better at it. She had a talent for languages. She could even mimic the different accents humans used in various regions. The Kashari had chosen their human hosts carefully. Each pair of observers would stay with a family that represented different aspects of human society. Some families were military, some were academic, some were artistic. The goal was to see humanity from many angles. Vexthar and Quinara would stay with the Morrison family in Seattle. Greg Morrison was a retired military pilot. His wife Amy worked as a nurse. They had a young child named Sophie who was 3 years old. The family had volunteered for the program and passed extensive background checks. Greg's military experience was why the council chose this placement for Vexthar. The commander could discuss tactics and strategy with someone who had actually flown combat missions. He could test his theories about human warfare against real experience. It was perfect. Amy's medical background would help Quinara understand human health and biology better. The Kashari knew human anatomy from their observations, but speaking with a medical professional would fill in gaps in their knowledge. The child, Sophie, was simply part of the family unit. Humans valued their offspring highly, often making life decisions based on what was best for their children. Understanding human family dynamics required observing the children too. Vexthar pulled up the Morrison family's file on his screen. Photos showed Greg as a tall human with short brown hair and a strong build. Amy was shorter with long blonde hair and a gentle smile. Sophie was tiny compared to her parents with curly brown hair and bright blue eyes. She looked happy in every photo. "Human children are fascinating," Quinara observed, looking at Sophie's picture. "They require years of care before becoming independent. Most species in the galaxy mature much faster." "Another human weakness," Vexthar noted. "Long childhood means long vulnerability. Yet they have thrived as a species." "Perhaps the long childhood creates the strong bonds we have observed," Quinara suggested. "Years of caring for helpless offspring would naturally create deep emotional connections." Vexthar filed away the observation. It was a good theory. Everything about humans connected to everything else. Their weakness created their need for cooperation. Their emotions drove their creativity. Their stubbornness came from their refusal to accept their physical limitations. The commander stood and walked to the large window that showed Earth in the distance. The blue and white planet hung in space like a jewel. Somewhere down there, billions of humans lived their lives, unaware they were being watched. Soon that would change. "I wonder what they will think of us," Vexthar said quietly. "When they look up and see our ships, when they meet us face to face. Will they welcome us or fear us?" "Their history shows they are capable of both," Quinara replied. "Humans have welcomed strangers and fought strangers, sometimes at the same time. That was the paradox of humanity. They were capable of great violence and great kindness, often from the same individual. A human soldier could kill enemies in battle, then risk his life to save a wounded enemy afterward. They could destroy cities with weapons, then spend decades. The day arrived with clear blue skies over every continent. At precisely 12 noon, Greenwich Mean Time, 3 Keshari ships appeared in Earth's atmosphere. One hovered over New York City, another over Beijing, and the third over London. They did not hide or cloak themselves. They simply appeared massive and silver, reflecting the sunlight like mirrors in the sky. The world stopped. Every human with eyes looked up. Every screen showed the ships. Every heart beat faster with the same question. Were they here in peace or war? The answer came within minutes. The ships broadcast a message in every human language simultaneously. The voice was strange, musical, and precise, but the words were clear. We are the Kashari. We come in peace. We wish to speak with your leaders and learn from your people. We mean no harm. Greg Morrison stood in his backyard in Seattle, staring at the sky. He could not see the ships from his location, but his phone showed him the footage from around the world. His military training made him analyze the situation automatically. The ships had positioned themselves to be visible but not threatening. They had announced themselves immediately. They had chosen major cities but not military bases. Every choice suggested peaceful intent. "Greg, are you seeing this?" Amy called from inside the house. She was holding Sophie on her hip, both of them watching the television. "Yeah, I see it," Greg replied, walking back inside. His mind was racing. First contact with aliens. It was actually happening. Humanity was not alone. Sophie pointed at the screen showing the ship over New York. "Big," she declared with the simple certainty of a 3-year-old. "Very big," Amy agreed, her voice shaky. She was trying to stay calm for Sophie's sake, but Greg could see the fear and excitement in her eyes. This changed everything. The entire world had just changed. The next days passed in a blur of news coverage and speculation. The Kashari remained in their ships while human governments scrambled to respond. The United Nations organized meetings. Scientists analyzed every image of the ships. Military forces went on alert, but no one fired. Everyone waited. 2 weeks later, the Kashari made their next move. They requested permission to land small shuttlecraft in designated areas. They wanted to meet with human leaders and begin formal diplomatic relations. Every major government agreed. The shuttles came down gently, landing in secure areas surrounded by cameras and soldiers. The first Kashari to exit a shuttle became the most photographed being on Earth within seconds. Tall and silver-skinned, with large dark eyes and graceful movements, they looked almost like the aliens from old human science fiction. But they were real. They stood on Earth's soil and spoke to human representatives with calm, measured voices. "We have watched your species for many years," the Kashari ambassador said at the first official meeting. "We wish to know you better. We propose a cultural exchange. Some of our people will live among yours. We will learn from each other." The proposal was debated for weeks. Some humans opposed it, fearing a trap. Others supported it, eager to learn about the galaxy beyond Earth. Eventually, the majority won. Humanity would participate in the exchange program. That was when Greg received the call that changed his life. A government official explained that his family had been selected as potential hosts for 2 Kashari observers. His military background, Amy's medical work, and their stable family situation made them ideal candidates. Would they be willing? Greg and Amy talked long into the night after Sophie was asleep. This was dangerous. No one really knew what the Kashari wanted. But it was also an opportunity. Their daughter would grow up knowing that humans were part of something larger than Earth. She would live in a future where humans and aliens worked together. "We should do it," Amy finally said. "If they meant to hurt us, they would have done it already. And someone has to take the first step." "Why not us?" Greg agreed. They called the official the next morning and accepted. Within a week, they received detailed information about their guests. Commander Vexthar and Scholar Quinara would arrive in 1 month. The commander was a military analyst. The scholar studied biology and culture. Both had spent decades studying humanity from space. The government provided instructions on how to prepare. The Kashari could eat most human food, though they preferred less salt and spice. They needed slightly cooler temperatures than humans but could adapt. They did not sleep like humans, instead entering a rest state for a few hours each night. They were peaceful and polite by nature. Amy prepared the guest room, removing some furniture to give the Kashari more space. Their bodies were taller than humans, and they preferred minimal decorations. Greg reviewed the security protocols the government had provided. There would be regular check-ins. If anything seemed wrong, help would come quickly. Sophie had no idea what was happening. Amy tried to explain that special visitors were coming to stay with them. Sophie asked if they were bringing toys. Amy said she did not know. Sophie went back to playing with her blocks, unconcerned with the monumental historical event about to happen in her home. The day arrived. A black government vehicle pulled up to the Morrison house. Two Kashari stepped out, moving with a grace that made them seem to float rather than walk. Vexthar was taller with darker silver skin. Quinara was slightly shorter with brighter coloring. Both carried small bags containing their personal belongings. Greg opened the door before they could knock. He had faced enemy aircraft in dangerous combat situations, but his heart was pounding now. He was meeting aliens. Real aliens who had traveled across space to visit his home. "Commander Vexthar, Scholar Quinara, welcome," Greg said, extending his hand. He had been told that Kashari understood human handshakes. Vexthar took his hand gently. The Kashari's skin was warm and smooth, not cold like Greg had somehow expected. "Thank you for hosting us, Greg Morrison. We are honored to be welcomed into your home." The commander's voice was strange, musical with odd pauses, but his English was perfect. Quinara shook hands with Amy, who had appeared with Sophie hiding behind her legs. The little girl peeked around her mother's knees at the tall silver beings. "This is our daughter, Sophie," Amy said, gently pushing the girl forward. Sophie stared up at Quinara with wide eyes. The Kashari knelt down to be at the child's level, making herself less intimidating. "Hello, Sophie. I am Quinara. What a beautiful child you are." Sophie continued to stare. Then she reached out and touched Quinara's hand. "Shiny," she announced. Everyone laughed, even the Kashari, who made a clicking sound that seemed to indicate amusement. The tension broke. If a 3-year-old could accept aliens, surely adults could too. They moved inside. Greg showed the Kashari to their room. Vexthar and Quinara looked around with obvious interest, examining everything from the bed to the window curtains. They asked questions about everything. Why did humans sleep on soft surfaces? Why did they cover windows with fabric? How did the electrical outlets work? Amy prepared lunch while Greg talked with their guests in the living room. The Kashari sat on the couch carefully, as if afraid they might break something. Sophie brought them her favorite book and insisted that Quinara read it to her. The scholar did so with perfect seriousness, her musical voice making The Very Hungry Caterpillar sound like an epic tale. Over lunch, Vexthar explained their mission. "We wish to understand daily human life. We have studied your species extensively, but only from a distance. We have observed your military operations, your governments, your cities, but we have not experienced what it means to simply be human." "So you want to live like a normal family lives?" Amy asked. "Exactly," Quinara confirmed. "We want to shop for groceries with you, watch you prepare meals, see how you spend your evenings, observe how you raise your child. The ordinary details that make humanity what it is." Greg found this amusing. "You've been watching us for decades, but you want to see how we buy groceries?" "We can observe actions from space," Vexthar explained. "But we cannot understand meaning without context. When a human soldier risks his life to save another, we see the action, but we do not fully understand the emotion behind it. We know humans love their children, but we do not understand what that love feels like in daily life." Sophie had lost interest in the adult conversation. She was trying to stack her blocks into a tower, but they kept falling. She made a frustrated sound and knocked them all down deliberately. "She is developing her motor skills," Quinara observed. "Human children require years to master their bodies." "Yeah, everything is a learning process," Amy said. "Walking, talking, eating with utensils, all of it takes time." The afternoon passed in strange normalcy. The Kashari asked endless questions about everything. Why did humans wear shoes inside? Why did they paint their walls different colors? Why did Sophie need a nap in the middle of the day? Greg and Amy answered as best they could, often realizing they had never thought about why they did certain things. They just did them because that was how humans lived. Vexthar was particularly interested in Greg's military service. They talked for hours about tactics and strategy. The commander's knowledge was impressive. He understood aircraft operations better than some pilots Greg had served with. He had studied human warfare with academic precision. "You see combat as a puzzle to solve," Greg observed. "But when you are..." The first 2 weeks passed smoothly, almost too smoothly. Vexthar and Quinara settled into the rhythm of human life with remarkable ease. They learned to navigate the Morrison household, to respect privacy, to participate in family routines. Each day brought new discoveries about humanity that never appeared in their surveillance data. Mornings began with breakfast. Amy made simple meals that the Kashari could digest. Scrambled eggs, toast with minimal butter, fruit cut into small pieces. The aliens found human food bland compared to their own cuisine, but they adapted without complaint. They sat at the kitchen table with the family, observing the morning rituals. Greg read news on his tablet while eating. Amy reviewed her work schedule and made lists of errands. Sophie demanded specific foods and refused others with the arbitrary logic of a 3-year-old. Sometimes she wanted cereal. Sometimes she wanted nothing but orange slices. The reasons changed daily and seemed to follow no pattern. Human children are very particular about their food preferences, Quinara noted one morning, watching Sophie reject perfectly good toast because it was cut diagonally instead of straight across. "You have no idea," Amy replied with a tired smile. Last week she only ate foods that were yellow. The week before she refused anything that touched other foods on her plate. Vexthar found this fascinating. What purpose does such selective eating serve? Is it a survival instinct? Greg laughed. No purpose at all. She is just 3. Everything is about control at this age. She cannot control much in her life, so she controls what she will eat. The commander filed this information away. Human children asserted independence through food choices. Another piece of the puzzle about how humans developed their famous stubbornness. It started early, apparently. After breakfast, Greg often took the Kashari on morning walks through the neighborhood. They observed humans starting their days, leaving for work, walking dogs, jogging past in athletic clothes. Everyone stared at the tall silver aliens, but most people waved or said hello. Seattle had received several Kashari visitors, and the initial shock was wearing off. One morning they passed a park where human children played. Vexthar stopped to watch. The children ran, jumped, climbed on equipment that looked designed to help them develop strength and coordination. Some children played alone. Others played together, already forming the social bonds that humans prized so highly. They practiced combat skills, Vexthar observed, watching 2 boys chase each other. They are playing tag, Greg corrected gently. It is a game. But it develops the same skills as pursuit and evasion tactics, the commander insisted. Greg considered this. I guess you are right. Kids do learn through play. Running, climbing, teamwork. Those same skills translate to other things later in life, including military service. Vexthar watched a girl fall off a climbing structure and start crying. Her mother rushed over, checked for injuries, comforted her, and encouraged her to try again. The girl wiped her tears and climbed again, this time successfully reaching the top. The triumph on her small face was unmistakable. Failure, comfort, encouragement, success, Vexthar said quietly. The cycle repeats endlessly in human development. That is how we learn, Greg agreed. You cannot get better without failing first. Meanwhile, Quinara spent her mornings with Amy and Sophie. The scholar was deeply interested in human medicine, asking endless questions about diseases, treatments, and the human immune system. Amy explained her work at the children's hospital, the cases she saw, the families she helped. You care for children who are not your own, Quinara said. You feel emotional connection to patients you have just met. Of course, Amy replied. They are children. They need help. That is enough reason to care. This was difficult for Quinara to fully understand. Kashari felt affection for their own offspring, but not the intense protective instinct that humans showed toward all children. Yet humans would risk themselves for any child in danger. It was illogical but admirable. Sophie became comfortable with the aliens quickly. Children adapted faster than adults, accepting the strange as normal with little effort. Within days, she was showing Quinara her toys and demanding that the scholar play with her. Quinara obliged with scientific curiosity, observing how human children used imagination to create elaborate stories from simple objects. A stuffed bear became a doctor. A toy truck became a spaceship. 3 blocks stacked together became a castle under attack by invisible dragons. Sophie narrated these scenarios with complete conviction, living fully in her imaginary world. Quinara participated carefully, not wanting to disrupt the child's development. Human children spend years in imaginative play, the scholar noted to Vexthar during their evening reports. They create complex fictional scenarios and emotional narratives. This must contribute to their creative problem-solving abilities as adults. Another piece of the puzzle, Vexthar agreed. Humans are not born as warriors. They are born as imaginative, emotional, stubborn creatures who learn to channel those traits productively. Afternoons varied. Sometimes the family went shopping. and the Kashari experienced the chaos of human grocery stores. Thousands of products, bright colors, overwhelming choices. Humans selected foods based on preference, price, nutrition, brand loyalty, and dozens of other factors. The decision-making process was complex and often emotional rather than purely logical. Sophie's presence made shopping even more complicated. She wanted treats from every aisle. She asked for toys they passed. She sometimes tried to escape the shopping cart to explore on her own. Amy navigated these requests with practiced patience, saying yes to some things and no to others, explaining why when Sophie asked. "You negotiate with your child," Vexthar observed. "You explain your decisions." "She is learning to understand how the world works," Amy explained. "If I just say no without reasons, she does not learn anything except that I have power over her. If I explain that candy is not healthy for every meal, she starts to understand nutrition." The commander was impressed. Human child rearing was not simply controlling the young. It was teaching them to think, to understand, to make decisions. It was preparing them to be independent adults. The process took years of patient explanation and guidance. Other afternoons, the family stayed home. Amy did household chores while Sophie played. The Keshari observed how humans maintained their living spaces, the endless cycle of cleaning and organizing. They asked why humans accumulated so many possessions. Why keep objects with no practical use simply because they were beautiful or meaningful? "We are sentimental," Greg explained, holding a photo of his military unit. "This picture is just paper and ink, but it represents memories and friendships. The object matters because of what it means to us." This was another uniquely human trait. Objects gained value through emotional association. A worn stuffed bear that Sophie loved was worth more to her than an expensive new toy. The bear had been with her since birth. It had absorbed her tears and witnessed her dreams. It was irreplaceable, not because of its physical properties, but because of what it represented. Evenings were Vexthar's favorite time. After dinner, Greg often talked about his military experience. The commander could ask direct questions and receive first-hand accounts of combat operations. Greg was honest about both the excitement and horror of war. He explained how training prepared you for some things but not others. How you relied on your team, absolutely. How split-second decisions determined who lived and died. "When you are in combat, you do not think about strategy," Greg said one evening. "You just react. Your training takes over. Later you remember it all and wonder how you did what you did. But you chose to serve," Vexthar pointed out. "You volunteered for dangerous duty. Why?" Greg thought about this. Lots of reasons. Family tradition, wanting to serve my country, believing in something larger than myself, maybe wanting to test myself too, to see if I was capable of doing hard things. You sought out danger intentionally. In a way, yes. Humans do that. We climb mountains, race vehicles, explore dangerous places. We are not content with safety. We want to push boundaries. Vexthar understood intellectually but not emotionally. Kashari avoided danger when possible. They valued safety and stability. The human drive to seek challenges and risks was alien to him in the most literal sense. Sophie's bedtime routine was another revelation. Bath time, brushing teeth, choosing pajamas, selecting books to read, all required negotiation and patience. Some nights Sophie cooperated. Other nights she resisted every step, wanting to stay up and play. Amy and Greg remained calm through both scenarios, maintaining firm but gentle authority. "You must enforce rules while maintaining the emotional bond," Quinara observed. "You cannot simply force compliance." "Exactly," Amy agreed. "If we just made her do things through force, she would fear us instead of trust us. We want her to learn self-discipline, not just obedience." The Kashari watched Amy read bedtime stories to Sophie. The little girl snuggled close with her stuffed bear. The books were simple tales with clear morals. Good characters won. Bad characters learned lessons. Problems were solved through kindness or cleverness. Sophie absorbed these stories night after night, learning human values through narrative. The morning started like any other. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows. Birds sang outside. The coffee maker gurgled as it finished its cycle. Amy moved around the kitchen preparing breakfast while Greg checked his tablet for messages. Vexthar and Quinara sat at the table, having become comfortable with the morning routine. Sophie came downstairs in her pajamas, dragging her stuffed bear by one arm. Her curly hair was messy from sleep and her face was still soft with drowsiness. She climbed into her chair at the table and looked at her mother expectantly. "Good morning, sweetie," Amy said cheerfully. "What do you want for breakfast?" "Juice," Sophie announced. "In my purple cup." Amy smiled and moved to the cabinet. She reached for the green cup sitting there. The purple cup was in the dishwasher, still dirty from yesterday. Amy had run the dishwasher late last night, and the dishes inside were clean but not yet put away. "The purple cup is being washed," Amy explained in the patient voice she used when managing Sophie's requests. "You can use the green cup this morning." There was a moment of silence. Vexthar was reviewing his notes from yesterday on his data tablet. Quinara was watching the birds outside the window. Greg was reading an article about the Kashari diplomatic progress with human governments. None of them were prepared for what happened next. Sophie's face changed. It was subtle at first, just a tightening around her eyes and mouth. But then her expression transformed completely. Her eyebrows drew down. Her mouth opened. Her face began to turn red, the color spreading from her cheeks to her forehead. "No," Sophie said, her voice low and dangerous. "Purple cup." Amy remained calm. She had been through this before. "I know you want the purple cup, but it is dirty. Look, the green cup is nice too." She filled the green cup with juice and set it in front of Sophie. Sophie did not touch the cup. She stared at it like it had personally offended her. Then she looked at her mother with an expression of pure betrayal. Her bottom lip began to tremble. Her small hands curled into fists. "Purple cup!" Sophie screamed. The sound that came from her was shocking in its intensity. Vexthar's head snapped up from his tablet. Quinara's large eyes widened in alarm. Greg set down his tablet and prepared to intervene if necessary. But Amy just sighed and continued making eggs, completely unbothered by the scream that had echoed through the kitchen. "Sophie, you can have the purple cup later." "Right now, drink your juice from the green cup," Amy said firmly but gently. Sophie's response was immediate and dramatic. She swept her arm across the table, sending the green cup flying. Juice splashed across the table and dripped onto the floor. The cup bounced twice before rolling under the refrigerator. Then Sophie threw herself backward in her chair. For a terrible moment, Vexithar thought she would fall and hurt herself. But the child caught herself, slid out of the chair and dropped to the kitchen floor. Once there, she began what could only be described as a full-scale emotional meltdown. Sophie screamed. Not words, just pure sound. A high-pitched wail that seemed impossible to come from such a small body. She kicked her legs against the tile floor, the impacts making sharp slapping sounds. She pounded her fists on the floor beside her. Her whole body arched and twisted like she was trying to escape from her own skin. Vexthar stood up instinctively, his military training recognizing a crisis situation. "Is she injured?" he asked urgently. "Should we call for medical assistance?" Amy glanced at Sophie, who was now rolling from side to side while screaming continuously. "She is fine. This is a tantrum. She is upset about the cup. But she appears to be in severe distress," Quinara said, also standing. The scholar's medical knowledge told her that Sophie's vital signs must be elevated dangerously. The screaming required enormous lung capacity. The physical exertion of the thrashing must be exhausting. "She is upset, not hurt," Amy explained, stepping over Sophie to reach the paper towels. She began cleaning up the spilled juice with practiced efficiency. This is normal behavior for her age. She wants what she wants, and she does not have the emotional maturity to handle disappointment yet. Sophie's screaming continued without pause. She had worked herself into a rhythm now. Scream, kick, pound fists, arch back, repeat. Tears streamed down her red face. Her hair was plastered to her forehead with sweat. Her entire body trembled with the force of her rage and frustration. Greg stood up and calmly walked to another room. He did not seem concerned at all. Vexthar watched him go with confusion. A member of the family unit was clearly in distress, yet the adult male simply removed himself from the situation. "Should we not comfort her?" Vexthar asked Amy, who was now mopping up the floor around Sophie's thrashing body. "If we give her attention during a tantrum, we teach her that tantrums work," Amy explained, having to raise her voice to be heard over Sophie's screaming. "She needs to learn that this behavior does not get her what she wants. When she calms down, we will talk about feelings and appropriate responses." Vexthar watched in fascination and horror as Amy continued her morning routine. She finished cleaning the spilled juice. She scrambled eggs at the stove. She buttered toast. She poured coffee for herself and Greg, all while her offspring writhed on the floor screaming as though the world was ending. Sophie rolled toward the table and grabbed the table leg. She pulled herself partially upright, still screaming, and banged her forehead against the table leg 3 times. Not hard enough to cause real injury, but hard enough to make a sound. Quinara made a distressed sound. She is harming herself. She's being dramatic, Amy corrected. She is not actually hurting herself. If she were, I would intervene. This is performative. Watch. Sophie had indeed stopped hitting her head. She was now lying flat on her back, staring at the ceiling, screaming continuously. Her face was purple-red now. Veins stood out on her forehead. Her small chest heaved with each breath between screams. Vexthar's military mind was analyzing the situation automatically, and what he observed disturbed him deeply. Sophie was displaying several characteristics that made humans dangerous in combat. First, she was completely committed to her objective. She was not holding anything back or conserving energy. She was deploying her full capacity toward achieving her goal. Second, she showed remarkable endurance. The tantrum had been going on for 3 minutes now, and Sophie showed no signs of stopping. An adult Kashari would have exhausted themselves in half that time. Even young Kashari did not possess this kind of sustained energy output. Third, and most disturbing, was the psychological warfare component. The screaming was clearly designed to break down opposition through pure sensory assault. Vexthar had studied human psychological operations. He recognized manipulation when he saw it, even from a 3-year-old. But what shocked him most was the intensity. He had watched human soldiers in combat. He had seen them fight with determination and courage. He had seen them push through pain and exhaustion to complete their missions. Yet Sophie, a small child upset about a drinking cup, was displaying the same level of absolute commitment he had only seen from humans in life-or-death situations. How long does this typically last? Quinara asked, her voice tight with concern. Anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes, Amy replied, sitting down with her breakfast. She ate calmly while her daughter thrashed 3 feet away. She is actually calming down already. You can tell because the kicks are getting weaker, Vexthar observed closely. Amy was right. Sophie's movements were becoming less violent. The screaming was still constant, but the physical thrashing was decreasing. The child was exhausting herself. 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Sophie's screaming began to break up, interrupted by gasping breaths. Her face was still red, but the purple color was fading. Her kicks were now just weak movements of her legs. She was running out of energy. At the 7-minute mark, something happened that Vexithar would remember for the rest of his life. Sophie suddenly stopped screaming mid-wail. She turned her head and looked toward the window. Her expression transformed from rage to interest in less than a second. Kitty, Sophie said in a completely normal voice, pointing at a cat walking past outside the window. The change was so abrupt and complete that Vexthar questioned his own perception. One moment, Sophie had been in the depths of emotional crisis. The next moment, she was cheerfully identifying an animal outside. There was no transition period, no gradual calming, just an instant switch from extreme distress to casual interest. Sophie sat up, wiping tears and snot from her face with her pajama sleeve. She looked at the green cup that Amy had retrieved from under the refrigerator and cleaned off. Without any sign of her previous objection, Sophie picked up the cup and drank from it happily. Can I have toast? She asked her mother, as if the previous 7 minutes had never happened. Yes, you may have toast, Amy replied. But first we need to talk about what just happened. Were you upset about the cup? Yeah, Sophie admitted, climbing back into her chair. I wanted purple cup. I understand, but we do not scream and throw things when we are upset. We use words. Can you say I am sad the purple cup is dirty? Sophie repeated the phrase dutifully. I am sad the purple cup is dirty. Good. Next time you feel upset, use words instead of screaming. Okay. Vexthar spent the rest of that day in a state of mental shock. He performed his usual activities, asked his usual questions, and maintained his usual polite demeanor. But his mind was racing, analyzing and reanalyzing what he had witnessed that morning. That evening, after the Morrison family had gone to bed, Vexthar and Quinara sat in their guest room and communicated through their neural implants. They could speak silently this way, sharing thoughts and observations without disturbing the sleeping humans. We need to discuss the incident this morning, Vexthar began. The tantrum, Quinara confirmed. I have been unable to stop thinking about it. My medical training tells me that Sophie's physical stress levels during those 7 minutes were extraordinary. Her heart rate must have been elevated significantly. Her breathing was irregular. Her body was flooded with stress hormones. Yet she recovered completely within seconds. That is one aspect, Vexthar agreed. But I am more concerned with the tactical implications. Quinara tilted her head in confusion. Tactical implications of a child's emotional outburst? Consider what we observed through the lens of combat analysis, Vexthar explained. He activated his data tablet and began pulling up files. For 3 decades, I have studied human warfare. I have identified several key characteristics that make humans effective fighters. Let me show you something. He displayed a series of combat videos on his screen, human soldiers in various situations, all carefully cataloged and analyzed. Watch this footage. A human squad pinned down by enemy fire. Notice the commitment they show. They do not retreat. They fight with everything they have. They are completely dedicated to their objective. Quinara watched the footage. Yes, human determination in combat is well documented. Now think about Sophie this morning, Vexthar said. She was completely committed to obtaining the purple cup. She deployed her full capacity toward that goal. No hesitation. No holding back. The same absolute commitment we see in their warriors. He pulled up more footage. Here, a human soldier continues fighting despite injuries. Notice the endurance. Humans can sustain high levels of physical and mental stress for extended periods. They push through pain and exhaustion. Sophie screamed for 7 minutes without stopping, Quinara said slowly, beginning to understand. That level of sustained energy output should have exhausted her much sooner. Exactly, Vexthar confirmed. A Kashari child would have tired in half that time. Most species lack that endurance, especially at such a young age. But human children possess remarkable stamina for emotional expression. He displayed another video, this one showing psychological warfare tactics. Humans use intimidation and fear as weapons. They understand that breaking an enemy's will can be as effective as breaking their body. Now think about Sophie's screaming. That sound was designed to affect adult humans. It was psychological warfare, whether intentional or instinctive. Quinara made a clicking sound of distress. You are saying that a 3-year-old human child displayed combat characteristics. I am saying more than that, Vexthar replied. I am saying that those combat characteristics do not originate in military training. They originate in childhood. The intensity, the endurance, the psychological manipulation, these are not learned behaviors for humans. They are natural behaviors that get refined and directed through training. He pulled up his own research papers, the ones he had written about human warfare. Look at my analysis. I concluded that humans were effective warriors because they formed emotional bonds, showed remarkable creativity, and refused to surrender. I was correct, but I missed the fundamental truth. Which is? Quinara prompted. Humans are not warriors who became emotional. They are emotional beings who learned to weaponize their nature. Every combat characteristic I have documented comes from their basic emotional intensity. The bonds they form drive them to protect each other. The creativity comes from the same imaginative capacity we see in their children. The refusal to quit is the same stubbornness Sophie showed about her cup. Quinara was silent for a long moment, processing this information. So human military training does not create these traits. It simply channels them. Exactly, Vexthar confirmed. And now consider the implications. If human children naturally possess these characteristics, then human adults are constantly managing them. The calm professional soldier is not the baseline. The baseline is Sophie screaming on the floor. Control is the learned behavior. He displayed a graph showing human emotional development. Humans spend years learning to regulate their emotions. From infancy to adulthood, they gradually develop the ability to control their impulses. But that control is not instinctive. It requires constant effort, which means it can fail, Quinara said quietly. Or be deliberately released, Vexthar added. A human warrior can choose to let go of that control when tactically useful. They can access the raw emotional intensity of their childhood in a way most species cannot, because most species never had that level of emotion to begin with. He pulled up footage of human berserker rages throughout history, Vikings in battle, modern soldiers in close combat situations. Humans sometimes fought in states of extreme emotional intensity that bordered on madness. Now he understood why. They were not losing control. They were choosing to stop controlling something that was always there. We have been studying the refined product, Vexithar continued. We watched adult humans and concluded we understood them. But we never looked at where they came from. We never studied the development process. We saw the discipline without understanding what was being disciplined. Quinara pulled up her own notes on human child development. I observed Sophie's learning process over the past 2 weeks. She is constantly being taught to control her impulses. Use gentle hands. Inside voices. Wait your turn. Every day, humans teach their children to suppress their natural intensity. Not suppress, Vexthar corrected. Channel. That is the key distinction. Humans do not eliminate their emotional intensity. They learn to direct it. The same passion that makes a child scream about a cup makes an adult human fight for their beliefs, create beautiful art, or dedicate their life to scientific discovery. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. We thought we were studying a species that occasionally became emotional. We were wrong. We are studying a species that is fundamentally emotional, but has learned to appear rational. That makes them more dangerous than we thought, Quinara observed. Or more impressive. I am not sure which. Both, Vexthar replied. Think about what it means. Every human adult has successfully learned to control something that most species never have to control. They have mastered an internal chaos that would overwhelm most beings. That is an extraordinary achievement. He returned to his data tablet and began making new notes. I need to revise my entire assessment. Human military capability is not based on training and technology alone. It is based on the fundamental nature of their emotional architecture. They are born with the capacity for extreme intensity. Everything else builds on that foundation. Quinara pulled up medical data she had collected. From a biological perspective, human emotional responses are much stronger than most species. Their limbic system, the emotional center of their brain, is highly developed. At the same time, their prefrontal cortex, which manages rational thought and self-control, takes years to fully mature. So human children are all emotion with minimal control, Vexthar summarized. Yes, and as they grow, the control increases. But the emotional capacity remains strong. Adult humans still have powerful feelings. They simply get better at managing them, most of the time. Vexthar thought about Greg's stories of combat. The pilot had described moments of extreme fear, anger, and even joy during missions. He had felt intensely while still performing his duties professionally. That was the human gift, feeling everything while still functioning effectively. Consider the implications for the galactic community, Vexthar said. If we invite humans to join, we are inviting a species whose emotional intensity far exceeds the norm. They will have strong opinions. They will feel deeply about issues that other species approach logically. They will form intense bonds and equally intense rivalries. But they will also bring passion to shared goals, Quinara countered. Humans care deeply about things. That can be powerful if directed properly. They will fight for what they believe in. They will not give up on difficult problems. Their emotional investment could benefit everyone. Vexthar nodded slowly. You are right. The same characteristics that make them dangerous also make them valuable. They will push boundaries. They will take risks. They will insist on trying when others say something is impossible. He thought about Sophie again, that instant transformation from fury to delight when she saw the cat. And they are adaptable. More adaptable than we thought. A being who can shift emotional states that quickly, who can recover from distress in seconds, can adapt to almost anything. Sophie will grow up learning to control her tantrums, Quinara said. But she will never lose the capacity for intense feeling. She will simply gain the ability to choose when and how to express it. Like every other human, Vexthar agreed. They are all former children. That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed with no memory of the morning's dramatic events, Vexthar found himself sitting in the Morrison living room feeling more confused than he had in his entire life. Greg and Amy had invited the Kashari to join them for tea, a human ritual of relaxation that occurred after the child was asleep. The house was quiet now, peaceful in a way that made the morning's chaos seem like a dream. Vexthar held a cup of tea carefully, having learned the proper way to manage the hot beverage. Quinara sat beside him, equally thoughtful. Both aliens had spent the day processing what they had witnessed. Greg noticed their unusual silence. He was perceptive, a trait from his military days when reading situations quickly could save lives. You two have been quiet since this morning. Are you okay? Vexthar considered how to phrase his questions. Honesty seemed best. The conflict this morning. Sophie's response to frustration. We have observed human combat for decades, but this was unexpected. Greg laughed, the sound warm and untroubled. Amy smiled and sipped her tea. They both seemed amused by the Kashari's confusion. Yeah, welcome to toddlerhood, Greg said. Sophie's actually pretty mild compared to some kids I've seen. My sister's youngest used to throw himself on the ground in stores and scream until she gave up and left. Every single shopping trip was a battle. But the intensity, Quinara interjected, leaning forward with her large eyes focused on Amy. The absolute commitment to her emotional state. The physical exertion required. The rapid recovery afterward. Where does this come from? What biological purpose does it serve? Amy set down her cup and thought about the question seriously. That's a good question. From what I understand as a nurse, tantrums are actually a normal part of brain development. Sophie's emotional center is fully developed. She can feel everything. But the part of her brain that controls emotions, that provides logic and perspective, won't finish developing until she's in her 20s. So she feels adult emotions with a child's lack of control, Vexthar said slowly. Exactly, Amy confirmed. She felt genuinely devastated about that cup. To her, in that moment, it was a real crisis. She doesn't have the life experience to know it's trivial. She doesn't have the self-control to manage her reaction, so everything comes out at full intensity. Greg added, and it's not just Sophie. Every human goes through this. I threw tantrums as a kid, Amy did. My tough-as-nails drill sergeant probably did when he was 3. We all had to learn to control those big feelings. Vexthar felt his understanding of reality shift slightly. You are telling me that all humans experience this? That every human adult we have studied, every soldier, every leader, every scientist, went through years of being unable to control these emotional storms? Pretty much, Greg confirmed, stretching his legs out comfortably. It's part of growing up human. We're born with these intense feelings and basically no ability to regulate them. Parents spend years teaching us how to handle emotions appropriately. It's a long process. How long? Quinara asked. Amy considered this. Well, tantrums usually peak between ages 2 and 4. But emotional regulation continues developing through childhood and adolescence. Most people don't fully master their emotions until their 20s. Some never fully do. Vexithar set down his teacup with a shaking hand. The implications were staggering. When I watched human soldiers in combat, I observed their discipline and control. I concluded that was their natural state. But you are saying that control is learned, imposed, maintained through conscious effort. That's right, Greg said. Every calm adult you see is constantly managing emotions that could overwhelm them. We feel anger, fear, joy, sadness, all very intensely. We just learn not to throw ourselves on the floor screaming about it. Most of the time, Amy added with a slight smile. Everyone loses control occasionally. That's being human too. Vexthar thought about all the footage he had reviewed. Human soldiers maintaining composure under fire. Diplomats staying calm during tense negotiations. Scientists working patiently through complex problems. Every one of them was managing the same emotional intensity that Sophie had displayed that morning. This explains so much, he said quietly. When humans break under extreme stress, they do not just stop functioning. They often become more intense, more emotional, more like Sophie was this morning. Combat stress reaction, Greg confirmed. Yeah, when people hit their limit, the control breaks down. Sometimes you see trained soldiers crying or freezing up or even laughing inappropriately. The emotions come out when the control fails. But most of the time, most humans maintain that control, Quinara asked. Yes, Amy replied. That's what society depends on. We all feel intensely, but we express it appropriately. We use words instead of screaming. We take deep breaths instead of throwing things. We walk away from situations instead of attacking. It's learned behavior that we practice every day. Vexthar looked at Greg with new understanding. When you told me about your combat experiences, you described feeling intense fear and anger. But you continued functioning. You made decisions. You flew your aircraft effectively. Right, Greg agreed. I was terrified sometimes. Absolutely terrified. But I couldn't let that fear control me. I had to feel it, acknowledge it, and then do my job anyway. That's what training does. It doesn't eliminate the emotion, It teaches you to function despite it. Or because of it, Amy suggested. Sometimes emotions help. Fear makes you alert. Anger gives you energy. Love makes you protective. Emotions aren't the problem. Uncontrolled emotion is the problem. Quinara was taking notes on her data tablet. So human child rearing is essentially teaching emotional control to beings who naturally lack it. That's a big part of parenting, yes, Amy confirmed. We teach Sophie to identify her feelings, express them with words, and choose appropriate responses. When she wanted the purple cup, the appropriate response would have been to say, "I'm sad I can't use my purple cup." Instead, she screamed and threw things. Our job is to teach her better. And she will learn, Greg added. She'll still feel disappointed or frustrated, but she'll learn to handle it. That's growing up. You don't stop feeling, you just get better at choosing what to do with those feelings. Vexthar felt something like awe. Every human I have ever observed has successfully completed this process. They have all learned to control something that most species never have to control, because most species are not born with that level of emotional intensity. Really? Amy asked, interested. Other species don't feel things as strongly? Not like humans, Quinara explained. Kishari feel affection, contentment, mild concern. But we do not.